I was lounging on our living room sofa, absently scrolling through my phone, when I noticed my 15-year-old daughter Emma grinning at her screen with an expression I hadn't seen in months. The kind of smile that lights up a teenager's entire face, transforming them from the moody, eye-rolling creature they usually are into the sweet child you remember from years past. I couldn't help myself. The dad joke just tumbled out before I could stop it. Wow, I didn't realize algebra homework could be so entertaining these days, I said with what I thought was a playful tone. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Her face darkened like storm clouds gathering, and she shot up from her spot on the love seat across from me, her phone clutched protectively against her chest. The smile vanished so completely, it was as if it had never existed at all. She stood there for a moment, her chest heaving with emotion, before the words exploded out of her like they'd been trapped behind a dam. "I have a boyfriend, okay, Dad? Are you satisfied now? Are you happy that you made me tell you?" Her voice cracked on the last word, somewhere between fury and tears, and I felt my stomach drop like I'd just crested the highest point on a roller coaster. I took a deep breath, trying to process this sudden revelation while keeping my expression neutral. The parenting books all say to stay calm during these moments, to not overreact, but inside my mind was racing with 1,000 questions and concerns. "When do I get to meet this young man?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady and reasonable, though every paternal instinct in me was screaming to demand answers immediately. The effect was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Emma's bedroom door flew open with such force it bounced off the wall, and she stood in the doorway like some avenging angel, her face flushed with indignation. "You absolutely cannot meet him yet. Please, Dad, I'm begging you. Not until I turn 16. Then I'll explain everything, I promise. Just please trust me on this." The desperation in her voice caught me off guard, transforming my concern into genuine alarm. "Emma, sweetheart, if someone is threatening you or making you feel unsafe in any way," I began. But she cut me off with a frustrated groan that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. "Nobody is threatening me. Why do you always have to make everything so weird and dramatic? Why can't you just be normal about things for once?" Before I could formulate a response to defend myself, my phone began buzzing insistently on the coffee table. The screen showed my son Ryan's contact photo, him grinning at the camera in his University of Michigan sweatshirt from move-in day last year. I picked up immediately, grateful for the interruption from this intense confrontation with Emma. "Hey, buddy, how's everything going? What's new at school?" I started cheerfully, but he cut me off with an urgency that made my blood run cold. "Dad, is Emma dating someone?" His voice was strained and tight, like he was trying to hold back panic, and I felt my concern ratchet up another notch. "Ryan, what's wrong? You're scaring me. Is your sister in some kind of danger? Should I be worried?" The pause on the other end seemed to stretch forever before he responded. No, nothing like that exactly. Just please trust her, okay? Give her until her birthday like she asked. Dad, please. Just this once, don't investigate. Don't dig into this." The call ended before I could ask any more questions, leaving me standing there with the phone in my hand and a growing sense of unease settling over me like a heavy blanket. The next 2 weeks passed in a surreal haze of trying to respect Emma's privacy, while every parental alarm bell in my head rang constantly. I watched her more closely without trying to be obvious about it, noticed little changes in her behavior that I might have missed before. Then the most incredible thing happened, something so out of character I almost couldn't believe it was real. My Emma who hadn't voluntarily done a chore since she was 12 and trying to earn money for a concert ticket, started doing her own laundry. Not just occasionally, but twice a week like clockwork, hauling her basket downstairs and spending hours managing the washer and dryer. This was the same teenager who had steadfastly refused to learn how to operate the vacuum cleaner, claiming it was too complicated despite mastering every social media platform within minutes of downloading them. One afternoon, curiosity finally got the better of me as I was gathering towels for my own laundry. I passed by Emma's room and noticed her hamper sitting there, still half full despite her recent laundry enthusiasm. Without really thinking about the invasion of privacy, I found myself lifting out a few items, and that's when I found it. An oversized University of Michigan hoodie, the maize and blue colors unmistakable, far too large for Emma's petite frame. My heart began racing as I held it up, examining it like evidence in a crime scene. The same university where Ryan was a sophomore, the same school colors, the same style of hoodie I'd bought him just last Christmas. When Emma got home from school that day, I was waiting in the kitchen, the hoodie draped casually over the back of a chair where she couldn't miss it. She walked in chatting on her phone, saw the sweatshirt, and froze mid-sentence. Her face went through a series of expressions so quickly I could barely track them all. Surprise, fear, guilt, and finally a forced casualness that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh yeah, that's mine. It's from my boyfriend, actually," she said, her words tumbling over each other in their rush to get out. "Found it at the thrift store. You know how I love oversized hoodies. Boyfriend style, they call them. Super trendy right now." She snatched it from the chair and practically ran to her room, leaving me standing there with more questions than ever. That night changed everything. I'd gone to bed early with a headache, but woke around 2 in the morning with a dry throat that demanded water. As I padded past Emma's room in my slippers, trying to be quiet, I heard her voice through the door, muffled but urgent. She was on the phone at this ungodly hour, and what I heard made my blood freeze. I know, but I can't keep doing this anymore. The lying is literally killing me. I feel sick all the time. There was a pause, presumably while the other person spoke. Then her voice came again, even more distressed. "My dad will absolutely kill us when he finds out who you are. You know he will. He'll never understand, never forgive us." The next morning, Emma came down for breakfast wearing a turtleneck in the middle of summer. The fabric pulled up high on her neck despite the forecast calling for 90-degree weather. "New fashion choice?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light and conversational while inside I was cataloging every strange behavior. She mumbled something about trying different styles, but when she reached across the table for the orange juice, the turtleneck shifted slightly. I caught a glimpse of something she clearly didn't want me to see because she immediately yanked the fabric back up and adjusted it frantically. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw panic there before she grabbed a granola bar and practically sprinted back to her room, leaving her orange juice untouched on the table. I decided to wait until Mother's Day weekend to address the situation properly. It was a tradition in our family to visit my wife's grave together, all 3 of us, bringing fresh flowers and spending some time sharing memories. My wife Sarah had passed away when Emma was only 11, and these visits were sacred to us, one of the few times we all came together without the usual teenage resistance. That Friday before Mother's Day, I mentioned our plans at dinner, trying to gauge their reactions. Ryan called that night with an elaborate excuse about a massive economics project that absolutely had to be completed by Monday morning. Couldn't possibly be postponed. "I'm so sorry, Dad. You know I'd be there if I could. Mom would understand about school coming first. She always said education was the priority." An hour after Ryan's call, Emma announced she'd forgotten about a sleepover at her friend Ashley's house that had been planned for weeks. "Ashley's mom is going through a tough time with her divorce and really needs all the girls there for support," Emma explained, not quite meeting my eyes. When I called Ashley's mother to confirm, she sounded confused at first, then quickly agreed that yes, Emma was welcome to come over, though something in her voice suggested this was news to her too. The pattern was becoming undeniable, crystallizing into something I didn't want to acknowledge but couldn't ignore any longer. Every time Ryan mentioned possibly coming home for a weekend, Emma suddenly had urgent plans elsewhere. Every time she wasn't home, he was mysteriously too busy with schoolwork to video call. The coordination required for this dance they were doing was impressive and terrifying in equal measure. That night, I finally decided to confront her gently, to approach this with understanding rather than accusation. I knocked on her bedroom door and asked if we could talk. Before I could even get the first carefully prepared sentence out of my mouth, she erupted, "Why can't you just trust me for once in your life? Why does everything have to be an interrogation with you?" she screamed, her face red with emotion. She slammed the door so hard that a family photo fell off the hallway wall, the glass cracking in a spiderweb pattern across our smiling faces from happier times. But the worst part, the thing that truly convinced me something serious was happening, came just 2 days later. Emma came home from what she said was a trip to the mall with friends, but instead of shopping bags, she carried only the weight of a drastic decision. Her beautiful long hair, which she'd been growing out since middle school and treating with expensive oils and masks every week, was gone. In its place was a short, choppy bob that looked like it had been done at some trendy salon that specialized in dramatic transformations. "My boyfriend thinks it looks better this way. More sophisticated, more mature," she said, running her fingers self-consciously through what was left of her once prized hair. The gesture was so unlike her, so clearly influenced by someone else's opinion, that it broke my heart a little to see it. The financial irregularities were the final piece of evidence I needed to take action. I'd been monitoring the family accounts more closely since Sarah's death, making sure the kids had what they needed while staying within our means. That's when I noticed several transfers from Emma's college savings account to her checking account, totaling about $300. When I investigated further, all the charges from her debit card showed locations near the University of Michigan campus, restaurants, coffee shops, even a movie theater just a few blocks from where Ryan lived. When I asked her about it as casually as I could manage, she claimed it was for SAT prep materials and practice tests, but she couldn't look me in the eye as she said it, her gaze fixed firmly on her phone screen. That Mother's Day, instead of visiting Sarah's grave with my children, I found myself driving the 3-hour journey to Ann Arbor alone. The entire drive, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that there had to be some innocent explanation for everything I'd observed. But my gut, the same instinct that had served me well throughout my years as a parent, told me otherwise. Ryan's apartment was in an off-campus building, a converted Victorian house that had been divided into student housing units. I'd only been there once before, helping him move in the previous August. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and knocked on his door. Ryan opened it, and the way his face immediately drained of all color told me everything I needed to know. "Dad, oh God, we need to talk about Emma," he started, his voice shaking. But that's when I heard her voice from inside the apartment, casual and comfortable in a way that shattered my last hope for an innocent explanation. "Is that the pizza delivery already? I thought they said 45 minutes. The words died in her throat as she appeared behind Ryan, and the sight of her nearly brought me to my knees. My 15-year-old daughter stood there in a silk bathrobe that barely covered her thighs, her hair messed up in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, traces of smeared makeup around her eyes, suggesting she'd been here all night. We all stood frozen in that doorway for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. The silence was so complete I could hear the bass from someone's music several apartments away, could hear car doors slamming in the parking lot below, could hear my own ragged breathing as I tried to process what I was seeing. "Dad," Ryan started again, his voice stronger now, taking on a defensive edge that I recognized from every argument we'd had during his teenage years. "You need to remember that this is completely legal. Emma isn't your biological daughter." The words hit me like physical blows. "She's your wife's daughter from her first marriage. We're not related by blood. We're just step-siblings who happen to grow up in the same house." I stared at him in absolute shock, though of course I knew this fact, had known it since I'd married Sarah when Emma was just 3 years old. But hearing him use it as justification, as if it somehow made this situation acceptable, made my vision blur with rage. "Ryan, she's 15 years old," I managed to get out through gritted teeth. "You're 20, you're a sophomore in college, you're supposed to be the adult here, the one who knows better." "We fell in love," Emma interjected, tears streaming down her face now, mixing with whatever was left of her mascara. "We tried to fight it, Dad. We really did. But you can't control who you fall in love with. And besides, I'll be 16 in just a few months. That's the age of consent in lots of states." I stopped listening after that. My body moved without conscious thought, my fist connecting with my son's jaw before I even realized I'd swung. The crack of impact echoed in the hallway, and Ryan went down hard, his hands flying to his face as blood immediately began pouring from his nose. The pain in my knuckles was sharp and immediate, but it was nothing compared to the anguish tearing through my chest. I stood there watching my son, my boy who I'd raised and loved and been so proud of, trying to stem the flow of blood while my daughter screamed and rushed to help him, desperately trying to keep her robe closed with one hand while reaching for him with the other. I saw the blood dripping onto the cheap apartment carpeting, forming dark spots that would probably never come out, and suddenly my brain caught up with what my body had just done. My whole body started shaking uncontrollably, the adrenaline crash hitting me like a wave. I backed away from the doorway and into the hall, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste to get away. Ryan was yelling that he was calling the police, his voice thick and muffled from the blood and probably a broken nose. But Emma grabbed his arm and begged him not to, saying it would make everything worse for everyone, that assault charges would ruin everything. I managed to tell them both that this wasn't over, though my voice sounded strange and distant to my own ears before I turned and left. The walk to my car felt like moving through thick syrup, everything surreal and disconnected. I fumbled with my keys 3 times before managing to unlock the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. The drive home was a blur of rest stops and gas stations. I had to pull over at the first one to vomit in the parking lot, my stomach rejecting the coffee and toast I'd had for breakfast. Then again, at another rest stop 20 minutes later, when the image of Emma in that robe, standing behind my bleeding son, hit me again with fresh horror. My phone buzzed constantly on the passenger seat, and when I finally looked at it while stopped at a red light, I saw 17 missed calls from Emma, along with dozens of text messages I couldn't bring myself to read. I turned the phone off completely and kept driving. When I finally made it home, I sat in the driveway for at least 10 minutes before going inside, trying to gather the strength to enter the house where I'd raised both of them, where we'd been a family. The house was dark and empty, shadows stretching across rooms that held too many memories. I collapsed onto the couch without turning on any lights, still wearing my jacket and shoes, and just sat there staring at nothing while trying to figure out what to do next. Sleep was impossible that night. I sat in the darkness, my mind racing through every interaction between Ryan and Emma over the past months, looking for signs I'd missed, wondering how long this had been going on under my nose. Part of me wanted to drive back there and drag her home by force, but I knew that would only result in my arrest after what I'd already done, and that wouldn't help anyone. Around 4 in the morning, as the first hints of dawn were starting to lighten the sky outside, I realized I needed professional help to handle this situation. I couldn't do this alone, couldn't trust my own judgment when my emotions were so raw and overwhelming. As soon as the clock hit 8 on Monday morning, I called Child Protective Services, my hands steady now with purpose, even if my voice wasn't. The woman who answered sounded tired and routine, until I explained that my 20-year-old college son was involved with my 15-year-old stepdaughter. Her tone immediately shifted to alert professionalism, and she began asking rapid-fire questions about the situation, taking detailed notes and scheduling someone to come to my house later in the week. 2 days felt like 2 years before Wednesday arrived, and Patricia Martinez showed up at my door. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes but a no-nonsense manner, carrying a thick folder and wearing an expression that suggested she'd seen too much in her career. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of family meals, while she explained the process. They would need to interview Emma at school without me present, investigate Ryan, create a safety plan, and coordinate with multiple agencies given the jurisdictional complexities. I handed over everything I'd collected, every piece of evidence I'd gathered in my amateur investigation, including bank statements, photos of the Michigan hoodie I'd found, and a detailed timeline I'd created of all the suspicious incidents. That evening after Patricia left, I sat at my computer for hours creating a comprehensive document of everything I could remember. Every late-night phone call I'd overheard, every sudden change in Emma's behavior, every convenient excuse from Ryan about why he couldn't come home. I took screenshots of bank transfers, saved text messages that seemed suspicious in retrospect, created folders within folders of evidence while my hands shook with a combination of exhaustion and adrenaline. This methodical documentation helped me feel like I was doing something productive, taking action to protect my daughter even if she didn't want protection. Thursday night, my phone buzzed with a text from Ryan that made my blood boil all over again. His message was long and rambling, talking about how they were really in love, how I was overreacting about the age difference, how nothing sexual had happened until very recently. He begged me not to ruin his life over something that would be perfectly legal in just a few months when Emma turned 16. I didn't respond to his message, couldn't trust myself to engage without saying something I'd regret, but I took a screenshot and added it to my growing evidence folder. The admission that something sexual had occurred recently, even if he was trying to minimize it, was exactly the kind of confession Patricia had told me would be helpful for the investigation. Friday became a frustrating maze of phone calls as I tried to figure out which law enforcement agency was supposed to handle this case. Since Ryan lived in a different county near campus, there were jurisdictional questions that no one seemed able to answer definitively. The campus police said it was our home county's problem since Emma was a minor residing here, but our county sheriff's office said the university needed to be involved since Ryan was a student there, and the incidents occurred near campus. I spent 3 hours on hold being transferred between different departments, explaining the situation over and over again to different officials who all seemed sympathetic but uncertain about protocol. Finally, someone suggested I document everything and submit reports to both jurisdictions, letting them sort out who would take the lead. That evening, I called Ashley's mother to verify all those supposed sleepovers Emma had claimed over the past months. When I explained why I was asking, trying to be delicate about the situation while still conveying the seriousness, she went completely silent. After a long pause, she told me Emma had only actually stayed over twice in the past 6 months, and both times were for legitimate school group projects. Her voice sounded sick with realization, as she understood she'd been inadvertently helping them maintain their deception, and we both kept apologizing to each other, even though neither of us had done anything wrong. She promised to write down everything she could remember about dates and times, offering to provide a statement to authorities if needed. Monday morning arrived with Patricia calling to inform me she would be interviewing Emma at school that afternoon. Standard protocol dictated that I couldn't be present for the interview, which made my stomach churn with anxiety. The idea of my daughter facing these difficult questions alone, even though I understood it was necessary to get honest answers, went against every protective instinct I had. I spent the entire day at work accomplishing absolutely nothing productive, checking my phone every 5 minutes for updates that didn't come, drinking cup after cup of coffee that only made my anxiety worse. When Emma got home that afternoon, the front door slammed with enough force to rattle the windows throughout the house. She stormed into the living room where I was pretending to read a magazine, her face contorted with rage and tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're ruining my entire life," she screamed, her voice breaking. "You told them lies about Ryan being some kind of predator when we're in love, real love, the kind you read about in books, the kind most people never find." I tried to explain calmly that I was trying to protect her, that she was too young to understand the power dynamics at play, but she was beyond listening. She ran to her room and locked the door, and I could hear things being thrown around inside, the crashes and thumps of a teenager's rage finding physical expression. Around 7 that evening, Patricia called back with a measured, professional tone that nevertheless conveyed concern. She said there were troubling patterns in how Emma had answered questions about the relationship, red flags that suggested grooming behaviors and manipulation. She couldn't share specific details due to confidentiality rules, but said they would need to conduct follow-up interviews and work with us to create a comprehensive safety plan. The phrase safety plan made this all feel more real and official than ever before, transforming my family crisis into a case number in some government database. Tuesday morning, I met with an attorney named Kenneth Rogers at his downtown office. The building was old and dignified, with dark wood paneling and the smell of leather and old books permeating everything. Kenneth was around 60, with silver hair and tired eyes that suggested he'd seen every possible family crisis in his long career. He listened to my entire story without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and delivered news that made my stomach drop. I could face assault charges for punching Ryan, regardless of the circumstances that provoked it. Michigan law didn't care about emotional provocation when it came to physical violence. My hands started sweating as he explained the potential consequences: fines, possible jail time, a criminal record that would follow me forever. However, Kenneth continued, we could file for a protective order to keep Ryan away from Emma since she was a minor. The paperwork took 2 hours to complete, my hand cramping from writing the same information on multiple forms, each one requiring slightly different details about the situation. Kenneth made copies of everything and promised to file it first thing the next morning. He warned me to document any attempts at contact from Ryan and to avoid any confrontation with him. The irony wasn't lost on me that my moment of protective rage might actually give Ryan's defense attorney ammunition to paint me as violent and unstable, potentially undermining our case to protect Emma. Wednesday, Kenneth called to confirm the protective order had been filed with the court. He emphasized again the importance of avoiding all contact with Ryan and documenting everything meticulously. The weight of possibly having made things worse by losing control that day in the apartment pressed down on me constantly. Kenneth tried to reassure me that judges understood parental reactions to disturbing discoveries, but warned that any further violence would seriously damage our position. Focus on Emma now, he advised. Let the legal system handle Ryan, even though every fiber of my being wanted to do more than just file paperwork. Thursday evening, I sat Emma down for a difficult conversation about new household rules that would take effect immediately. 7 o'clock curfew on school nights, 8 on weekends, no phone usage after 9 at night, and no going anywhere without explicit permission and details about where she would be. The reaction was explosive and immediate. She jumped up from her chair and hurled her dinner plate at the wall, where it shattered spectacularly, sending food and ceramic shards everywhere. "You're making this house worse than a prison," she screamed, her voice reaching pitches that hurt my ears. "I hate you more than I've ever hated anyone in my entire life. You're destroying everything good in my world over nothing, over love." She continued ranting about how I was ruining her life over something beautiful and pure that I was too closed-minded to understand. The neighbors definitely heard every word as she detailed how unfair and controlling I was being. She ran to her room and slammed the door with such force that a framed photo of our family vacation from 3 years ago fell off the hallway wall and shattered on the floor. I spent the next hour on my hands and knees, cleaning up broken plate fragments and food splatter while my hands shook uncontrollably. When everything was clean, I sat at the kitchen table and allowed myself 5 minutes to just break down, tears coming for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Friday morning brought another unwelcome surprise in my email inbox. A message from Ryan, sent at 3 in the morning, 4 pages long and clearly written in an emotional state. He detailed how their relationship had started when Emma visited campus for a prospective student weekend back in February, how they'd felt an instant connection over late-night conversations about literature and music. He claimed they both tried to fight their feelings for months, knowing it was complicated, but couldn't help falling deeply in love. The way he described Emma as special and mature beyond her years, how she understood him like no one else ever had, made my skin crawl with recognition of classic grooming language. He went on about how they hadn't planned for things to develop this way, how guilty they both felt about the secrecy, but they knew I would never understand or accept their connection. The more I read, the clearer the pattern became of an older college student systematically pursuing and manipulating his younger stepsister. He'd convinced her that their relationship was some kind of romantic destiny that others wouldn't understand, that secrecy was necessary to protect their special bond. The email revealed months of careful planning and deliberate deception that made me physically ill to contemplate. Saturday, I forwarded everything to Patricia and spent hours going through Ryan's email again with a highlighter, marking every problematic statement. The way he talked about waiting until she was older, keeping things secret for now, coaching her on what to say to me, all painted a picture of someone who knew exactly what he was doing was wrong. I printed multiple copies and highlighted different patterns in each. Emotional manipulation in yellow, admissions of physical relationship in pink, evidence of long-term deception in green. By the time I finished, the pages looked like a rainbow of predatory behavior. Sunday afternoon, I remembered we had an old shared cloud storage account from years ago, when the kids were younger and we stored family photos there. On a hunch, I logged in and discovered a treasure trove of evidence. Hundreds of messages between Ryan and Emma dating back to January. Before that February campus visit he'd claimed started everything. The messages showed Ryan initiating contact, slowly building emotional intimacy, suggesting the campus visit as a way to spend time together without raising suspicions. There were detailed instructions on how to delete messages, when to pretend she was at Ashley's house, what excuses to use for needing money. I spent the entire afternoon copying everything onto multiple flash drives, making backups of backups. The messages revealed how calculated this had been from Ryan's side, how he'd slowly isolated Emma from her friends, convinced her that their age gap didn't matter, that what they had transcended normal boundaries. One particularly disturbing exchange showed him coaching her on exactly what to say if I ever questioned the relationship, how to frame it as two people who just happened to fall in love despite being step-siblings. The level of manipulation made me alternate between rage and nausea as I documented everything. 2 weeks passed with Emma barely speaking to me, except for essential communication. She followed the new rules only because she had no choice, her every movement radiating resentment and barely contained fury. Our home felt like an armed camp, both of us moving carefully around each other, trying to avoid triggering another explosion. Then Wednesday afternoon shattered our uneasy peace when she didn't come home from school. The school confirmed she'd left at normal dismissal time, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I drove around town checking all her usual haunts, her friends' houses, the mall, the coffee shops she liked, but no one had seen her. By 6 in the evening, with no word from her and growing panic in my chest, I called the police to file a missing person report. The officer who took my report asked about custody disputes or family problems, and I had to explain the entire situation with Ryan and the protective order. The mention of a college-age stepbrother with a protective order changed the officer's entire demeanor from routine to urgent. They immediately began tracking her phone, which showed her location as an address in Ann Arbor, just blocks from Ryan's apartment. My entire body went cold seeing that familiar address on their computer screen. The officer explained they would contact local Ann Arbor police for a welfare check, but it would take time to coordinate between departments. Those next 3 hours in the police station were the longest of my life, sitting on uncomfortable plastic chairs, drinking terrible coffee from paper cups, checking my phone every 30 seconds for any communication from Emma. Other officers came and went, some nodding sympathetically as they passed, while I sat frozen in place waiting for news about my daughter. Finally, around 10 at night, an officer emerged from the back offices with an update that made me both relieved and furious. They'd found her at Ryan's apartment, physically safe but insisting she'd gone there voluntarily and wasn't being held against her will. The Ann Arbor police couldn't force her to leave since she wasn't in immediate physical danger, though they'd strongly encouraged her to return home and reminded both of them about the protective order. 2 officers from our local department drove up to escort her back, a 3-hour round trip that meant she wouldn't be home until well after midnight. I waited in the station rather than going home to an empty house, unable to bear the thought of being alone with my fears. When they finally brought her back at 1 a.m, she wouldn't even look in my direction. She walked past me like I was invisible, got in my car without a word, and maintained stony silence for the drive home. Once inside, she turned to face me with eyes blazing with hurt and anger. "You sent the police after me like I'm some kind of runaway criminal, like I'm a missing child on a milk carton," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I will never, ever forgive you for this humiliation, for treating me like property instead of a person with her own feelings and choices." She went to her room and for once closed the door quietly, which somehow felt worse than a slam. The next morning, the school counselor called requesting an urgent meeting about Emma's deteriorating academic performance and emotional state. She'd missed 8 days of school in the past month, wasn't turning in assignments, and teachers reported she seemed disconnected and distracted when she did attend. The counselor, Mrs. Peterson, spoke carefully but clearly about seeing signs of trauma in Emma's behavior, even though Emma insisted everything was fine and she just wanted everyone to leave her alone. We scheduled an appointment with a family crisis therapist named Dr. Abigail Chen for the following week, both of us recognizing that this situation required professional intervention beyond what the school could provide. Monday arrived faster than expected, bringing with it a call from Patricia informing me that the prosecutor's office was officially taking over the criminal investigation. She explained that my role now was to step back and let them handle the legal aspects while focusing on getting Emma into therapy and maintaining stability at home. The system felt overwhelming and frustratingly slow, but I signed all the necessary paperwork agreeing to cooperate fully with their investigation. Part of me wanted to take matters into my own hands, but I knew that would only make things worse for everyone, especially Emma. 3 days into this new phase, Emma somehow found out about the criminal investigation through social media. Apparently one of Ryan's friends had posted something vague about legal troubles. She came down to dinner already loaded for battle, grabbed her plate of spaghetti, and threw it at the wall with practiced aim. The pasta sauce created an abstract artwork of rage across my recently painted kitchen wall. "You turned everyone against Ryan, made him into some kind of criminal when all he did was fall in love," she screamed. "When I turn 16 in 4 months, I'm filing for emancipation and you'll never see me again. I'll make sure of that." She stormed upstairs before I could formulate any response, leaving me to clean marinara sauce off the wall while trying not to punch it myself. An hour of scrubbing and repainting the stained section gave me time to process her threat of emancipation, to realize how seriously she was taking this, how deeply she believed in this toxic relationship. The next week brought our first joint therapy session with Dr. Chen, a woman in her 40s with a calm presence that seemed to lower the temperature in the room. I finally admitted my mistakes, acknowledged that punching Ryan had been wrong, that trying to control everything through rules and restrictions might be making things worse rather than better. Emma's eyes widened with genuine shock when I admitted fault, probably the first time in months she'd heard me take responsibility for anything. She actually agreed to work on not screaming at me if I worked on being less controlling and more communicative about my concerns. Dr. Chen called it a breakthrough and wrote notes in her pad, though to me it felt like agreeing to basic human decency rather than any major progress. Still, it was the first productive conversation Emma and I had managed since this nightmare began, and I held on to that small victory like a life preserver. 2 weeks later came the protective order hearing, where a tired-looking judge extended the order temporarily, while prosecutors figured out exactly what charges to file against Ryan. Kenneth explained afterward that my assault charge was still under review, possibly for a misdemeanor that could mean fines or even jail time, though he remained optimistic about avoiding incarceration. Both cases crawled through the court system at a pace that felt glacial, each hearing scheduled weeks apart, each decision deferred for more information or review. The legal system that was supposed to protect my daughter felt more like a bureaucratic maze designed to frustrate everyone involved. A month into this new reality, Emma attempted something desperate and foolish by taking a Greyhound bus to Ann Arbor, violating both my rules and the safety plan we'd established with authorities. Campus security called me to report that Ryan himself had contacted them when she showed up looking for his new dorm room, which at least showed he was taking the legal situation seriously, even if she wasn't. The security officer said Emma was in their office, upset but unharmed, waiting for someone to pick her up. The fact that Ryan had reported her presence rather than meeting with her gave me a small amount of hope that he understood the gravity of the situation. I drove the entire 3 hours without music or radio, just the sound of tires on asphalt and my own thoughts for company. When I arrived at the security office, I found Emma sitting in a plastic chair, her arms crossed defensively, clearly expecting a lecture or explosion. Instead, I simply said I was glad she was safe and asked if she was ready to go home. The shock on her face at my calm response was almost comical. The drive home was completely silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before, less angry and more contemplative. When we pulled into our driveway, I told her again that I was just glad she was safe. Nothing more. No lecture about following rules or respecting boundaries. She looked at me with confusion and something that might have been the beginning of understanding before going inside. For the first time in months, she didn't slam her bedroom door, just closed it quietly like a normal person. During our next therapy session with Dr. Chen, we worked out modified rules that gave Emma more freedom in exchange for honest communication. She could have some phone time back and a slightly later curfew if she agreed to tell me exactly where she was going and when she'd return. No lying, no sneaking around, just basic transparency. She agreed to follow the rules if I agreed to really listen to her feelings without immediately jumping to protect mode. Dr. Chen helped us write it all down like a contract, both of us signing it with the solemnity of a peace treaty between warring nations. 3 days after our new agreement, a thick envelope arrived from the university's administration. The letter inside formally notified us that Ryan was under interim suspension pending a conduct review regarding his relationship with a minor. He'd been required to move to temporary graduate housing on the far side of campus while they investigated, away from the undergraduate dorms and his usual social circles. Emma found the letter on the kitchen counter where I'd left it, read it silently, then disappeared to her room for the rest of the day. She didn't rage or throw things, didn't scream about injustice or defend Ryan's actions. The quiet was more telling than any outburst would have been. That Sunday, I drove to Riverside Cemetery alone and spent 2 hours at Sarah's grave, talking out loud to my late wife about everything that had happened since Mother's Day. I told her about my failures, my violence, my struggle to parent our daughter through this crisis. I promised to try harder to be patient instead of just punitive, to remember that Emma was hurting and confused too, not just rebellious. The groundskeeper passed by several times, probably wondering about the man having an extended conversation with a headstone. But the act of speaking these truths aloud helped me find some peace I'd been missing. Kenneth called Monday morning with news about a plea deal the prosecutors had offered Ryan. He would plead guilty to misdemeanor charges related to providing alcohol to a minor and contributing to her delinquency, avoiding more serious charges in exchange for accepting a deferred sentence. This meant no jail time but a criminal record and strict probation terms, including maintaining the no-contact order with Emma until she turned 18. If he violated any terms, he would face immediate prosecution on the original, more serious charges. Kenneth explained this was actually a decent outcome considering the circumstances and my own assault charge, though it felt frustratingly lenient for what he'd done to my daughter. The deal would spare Emma from having to testify about intimate details of their relationship in open court, which Kenneth reminded me was an important consideration for her well-being. I struggled with accepting what felt like a slap on the wrist for grooming and manipulating my teenage daughter, but Kenneth patiently explained that the goal was protecting Emma's future, not exacting revenge on Ryan. The prosecutor needed my input by Friday, giving me 4 days to wrestle with whether this was enough justice for the harm that had been done to our family. Emma remained unaware of the plea negotiations, and I struggled with when and how to tell her. Part of me worried she'd see any punishment as too harsh, while another part feared she'd think I was going easy on him if she knew I'd agreed to the deal. The complexity of trying to balance justice, protection, and eventual healing felt overwhelming. Wednesday afternoon, I called Kenneth back and agreed to support the plea deal, recognizing that dragging this through a trial would only cause more trauma for everyone involved. He said he would notify the prosecutor and the formal plea hearing would be scheduled for the following month. 2 days after agreeing to the plea deal, Kenneth called to say Ryan's attorney wanted to deliver letters to our house, one for me and one for Emma. I waited anxiously on the front porch when the courier arrived, accepting 2 manila envelopes with our names written in Ryan's familiar handwriting. Mine contained 3 pages of neat printing on yellow legal pad paper, the same kind he'd used for note-taking all through high school. His letter was remarkably different from his earlier communications, taking full responsibility for pursuing Emma despite the age difference and the family relationship. He didn't make excuses or try to minimize his actions, simply acknowledged that what he'd done was wrong regardless of his feelings. He wrote about respecting the no-contact order going forward and understanding why it was necessary. The tone was mature and accepting in a way that made me wonder if legal counsel or therapy had helped him understand the gravity of his actions. There were no requests for forgiveness or attempts to maintain any connection, just a clear acknowledgement of boundaries that would remain in place. I read it several times, looking for hidden messages or manipulation, but found only what seemed to be genuine acceptance of consequences. When Emma came home from school, she immediately noticed the envelope with her name. She asked to read it privately in her room, and I handed it over without conditions, watching her climb the stairs slowly like she was carrying something fragile and dangerous. She stayed in her room for 2 hours, with no sound of music or phone calls, just silence that stretched through the house. When she finally emerged for dinner, she didn't mention the letter's contents, and I didn't ask. We ate together quietly, both lost in our own thoughts about what those 3 pages might have contained. Over the next week, I noticed subtle changes in Emma's behavior. She stopped mentioning Ryan during our conversations, stopped defending their relationship when discussing therapy homework with Dr. Chen. During our Thursday session, Emma sat quietly for 10 minutes before admitting that Ryan's letter had left her feeling confused and hurt. She said he'd accepted the no-contact order so easily in his letter, like their relationship hadn't meant as much to him as it had to her. Dr. Chen gently explored what that might mean, and I watched my daughter begin to process the reality that she might have been more invested in this relationship than he had been. June arrived with the end of school approaching and summer stretching ahead full of uncertainty. We worked out a structured schedule to avoid the idle time that might lead to poor decisions: morning chores, afternoon summer school to make up missed credits, and limited evening activities with approved friends. Emma complained about the structure, but without the explosive anger from before. We were both exhausted from months of conflict, settling into an uneasy peace that felt better than constant warfare, even if it wasn't quite harmony. The predictable routine seemed to help both of us find some stability after months of chaos. Summer school enrollment happened without major conflict, though Emma made sure I knew she wasn't happy about it. She chose English and math, practical choices to recover credits she'd lost during the worst of everything. That first day, I drove her to the community college where summer classes were held and watched her walk inside with her backpack, looking younger and more vulnerable than she had in months. The teenage bravado had worn down, leaving behind a girl who was tired and confused and just trying to move forward. I sat in the parking lot for an extra few minutes, allowing myself to hope that maybe we were finally heading in the right direction. The summer routine helped both of us more than I'd expected. Chores at 9 gave her structure and responsibility. Summer school at noon provided academic focus. Home by 4 meant we ate dinner together most nights. The predictability after months of crisis felt like medicine for both our frayed nerves. Our therapy sessions with Dr. Chen became less about crisis management and more about building healthy communication patterns for the future. The week before Emma's 16th birthday, we had a session focused entirely on expectations and reality. Dr. Chen asked Emma directly what she thought would change when she turned 16. And for the first time, Emma admitted she understood the no-contact order wouldn't magically disappear with her birthday. She said she knew Ryan couldn't be part of her life regardless of her age now, that the legal situation had created a barrier that wouldn't just go away. When Dr. Chen asked how she felt about that reality, Emma said it sucked, but she got it. She understood why things had to be this way. The acceptance in her voice, tired and sad but real, marked a major shift from months of insisting everything would be fine once she wasn't 15 anymore. My court date for the assault charge arrived in late June, the culmination of months of legal preparation and anxiety. Kenneth had negotiated a plea down to disorderly conduct with fines and mandatory anger management classes instead of jail time, which felt like more mercy than I probably deserved. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, mostly empty except for the necessary legal personnel, and to my surprise, Ryan sitting in the back row. He looked older somehow, more serious, watching the proceedings without making eye contact with me. I stood when the judge asked if I understood the charges and accepted responsibility for losing control that day. The judge sentenced me to $800 in fines plus 12 weeks of anger management classes, a fair consequence for letting my emotions override my judgment. Ryan left before I finished the paperwork, which was probably for the best. That evening, Emma asked if I was angry about the conviction, and I told her honestly that I deserved consequences for punching someone, even given the circumstances. She seemed genuinely surprised by my acceptance of responsibility, maybe seeing me as human and fallible for the first time in years. It was a small moment but significant, both of us acknowledging our mistakes without excuses or deflection. 2 nights later, I was reading in the living room when I heard Emma on the phone in her room, her voice carrying through the walls. Through her door, I could hear her saying she was deleting his number now, that this was the last time they'd talk. Her voice was steady, not dramatic or tearful, just matter-of-fact about ending this chapter. The next morning at breakfast, she mentioned casually that she'd boxed up some things to donate, including that Michigan hoodie and some other items she didn't need anymore. I simply said okay and asked if she needed help taking boxes to the donation center. She said she could handle it, and we continued eating breakfast like it was any other morning. Father's Day arrived with no special plans or expectations. I woke to the sound of Emma making noise in the kitchen, pots clanging and cabinets opening and closing. When I came downstairs, I found her attempting to make scrambled eggs and toast, even trying to figure out our complicated coffee machine that she'd never shown interest in before. We sat at the table together for the first time in months, without phones or distractions, sharing a simple breakfast. She mentioned missing her mom, and I admitted I missed her too. We talked for just a few minutes about small memories, nothing heavy or emotional, just shared remembrance of the woman who had brought us together as a family. She'd made my coffee with 2 sugars exactly how I liked it, remembering from years of watching me make it. The gesture meant more than any store-bought card could have, representing effort and attention and care. Summer school introduced Emma to new people who didn't know our story, giving her a fresh start with 2 girls from different schools who just saw her as Emma, not as part of some scandal. I would spot them laughing together at pickup time, making plans for movies or shopping trips, normal teenage activities that made my chest loosen with relief. One afternoon, I watched from the car as Emma showed them something on her phone that made all 3 girls burst into genuine laughter, the sound carrying across the parking lot like music. These new friendships felt like lifelines pulling her back to normal teenage life. When they invited her to a 4th of July pool party, I met the parents, verified adult supervision, and let her go without excessive warnings or conditions. Progress looked like trusting her with age-appropriate freedoms again, letting her be a teenager without the weight of adult complications. My anger management classes started the first week of July with an instructor named Tom, who'd been teaching the course for 20 years. He had the weathered look of someone who'd heard every excuse and justification possible, but still believed people could change. When we introduced ourselves and explained what brought us there, I simply said I'd punched my son after discovering something disturbing. Tom nodded without judgment, like he'd heard similar stories countless times before. The techniques were actually helpful, especially the physical warning signs of escalating anger and methods to interrupt the cycle before it reached violence. We learned breathing exercises and counting techniques that felt silly at first, but proved effective when practiced regularly. I found myself using them at home when Emma tested boundaries or pushed buttons she knew would provoke me. One evening, when she was complaining about curfew, I actually shared the counting technique with her, demonstrating how to breathe through frustration. Instead of mocking me, she tried it, both of us standing in the kitchen doing anger management exercises together. By the 3rd week of classes, Tom had us exploring how unprocessed grief could manifest as anger, how loss could make us hypervigilant about protecting what remained. The connection between losing Sarah and my extreme reaction to the threat against Emma became clearer, not as an excuse, but as understanding. Late July brought news through mutual acquaintances that Ryan had completed his degree requirements early and graduated without walking in the ceremony. Someone's mother who worked in the registrar's office mentioned seeing his name on the graduation list, but confirmed he hadn't participated in any of the celebrations. When I mentioned this casually to Emma while she was doing homework, she paused in her writing for maybe 10 seconds, her pencil hovering over the paper. Her eyes got glassy with unshed tears, but she blinked them away and returned to her math problems without comment. Later that night, I heard her crying softly in her room, processing this evidence that Ryan was moving on with his life while she was still in high school. I wanted to go to her, to offer comfort, but recognized some pain needed to be processed privately. The next week during therapy, Dr. Chen suggested we could reduce sessions to every other week, since we'd made significant progress in our communication and conflict resolution. Emma surprised me by saying she wanted to keep coming weekly through the summer to work on her own issues separate from our family dynamics. Dr. Chen agreed this was a healthy choice and scheduled individual sessions for Emma between our joint meetings. The fact that Emma was actively choosing therapy, seeing it as helpful rather than punishment, felt like a major victory in her emotional growth. I returned to work full-time in August after months of reduced hours and distracted presence. My desk had accumulated dust and outdated memos, evidence of how long I'd been only partially present in my professional life. Coworkers mentioned I seemed different, calmer, and more focused than they'd seen me in the past year. The routine of spreadsheets and meetings, conference calls, and deadlines felt almost meditative after months of family crisis. I found myself actually concentrating on quarterly reports instead of checking my phone constantly for emergencies that no longer came. Emma's request to get a part-time job at the local ice cream shop came during dinner one night, presented with mature reasoning about earning money and gaining work experience. Her new friend from summer school worked there and could help train her, and the manager was flexible about scheduling around school. We discussed hours and transportation, settling on 15 hours per week maximum with her friend's mom helping with rides. When I agreed, she jumped up and hugged me spontaneously before running to text her friends the good news. The casual affection, offered freely without calculation, meant more than any grand gesture could have. 3 days later, she came home from her first shift with chocolate sauce stains on her uniform shirt and $20 in tips that she displayed proudly. She demonstrated the soft serve machine technique with elaborate hand gestures and spoon movements, animated in a way I hadn't seen since before everything happened. That weekend, her work friends came over to practice for drama club auditions, filling her room with laughter and excited chatter about school starting soon. One evening after dinner, Emma lingered at the table instead of immediately escaping to her room. She picked at her placemat nervously before telling me that therapy had been discussing healthy relationships versus unhealthy ones. She said she understood now how the secrecy and isolation from friends had been red flags she'd missed or ignored. She told me Ryan had convinced her that their connection was so special and unique that others wouldn't understand, that keeping secrets was necessary to protect what they had. I listened without interrupting as she processed these realizations out loud, recognizing grooming tactics now that she had distance and perspective. She talked for 10 minutes about boundaries and trust, about how real love shouldn't require losing yourself or lying to everyone else. When she finished, she got up and did the dishes without being asked, leaving me sitting at the table marveling at her growth. The last week of August, I suggested a weekend trip to the lake before school started, expecting resistance or at least negotiation. Instead, Emma simply said okay and helped plan what to bring. We packed the car with fishing gear and snacks, driving 2 hours north while listening to music she chose that wasn't entirely terrible. At the lake, she left her phone in the cabin without being asked and helped carry equipment to the dock. We spent hours in comfortable silence, casting lines and reeling them in, watching the water ripple in the afternoon sun. When she hooked something substantial, she squealed with genuine excitement, and I helped her reel in a respectable base. She held it up for a photo, grinning broadly without any self-consciousness or teenage posturing, just pure joy at catching her first fish in years. We released it and kept fishing until sunset painted the lake in shades of orange and pink. The week before school started, I was reading in the living room when Emma appeared in the doorway wearing her pajamas. She stood there for a moment like she was gathering courage, then crossed the room and gave me a brief but genuine hug. Her goodnight dad was soft but clear, and she smelled like the vanilla lotion her mother had always loved. I said goodnight back, and she padded upstairs in her fuzzy slippers, leaving me sitting there with unexpected tears in my eyes. We weren't fixed, might never be completely healed from this trauma, but we were still here, still trying, still a family that had survived something that could have destroyed us. The next morning, she made eggs again, and we discussed her work schedule and what supplies she still needed for junior year. Normal conversation about normal things felt like the most precious gift imaginable after everything we'd been through. The eggs were slightly overcooked and the toast a little burnt, but it was perfect anyway. Looking at my daughter across the breakfast table, seeing her excited about drama club and nervous about her junior year coursework, I felt profound gratitude that we'd made it through to this moment of ordinary grace. The road ahead would still have challenges, would still require vigilance and patience and probably more therapy. But for now, we were okay. We were eating breakfast together and making plans and being the kind of normal family I'd feared we'd never be again. And that was more than enough.